He showed up at 4:30 a.m., never spoke unless spoken to, never missed a day, just a janitor at least. That's what they thought. Until a recruit spotted a tattoo on his neck, until smoke filled the gym and someone didn't make it out, until the quiet man with the mop walked straight through fire and carried out 215 pounds like it was routine. They never asked who he was, but after that morning, no one ever called him the janitor again. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The first time Kyle Monroe saw the janitor, it was 4:37 a.m. The gym lights at Redstone SEAL training facility had just flickered on, humming low against the silence of the pre-dawn. Kyle was still rubbing sleep out of his eyes when he noticed the figure in the corner. Mop in hand, already halfway through the weight room. The man didn't make a sound. No music, no earbuds, no heavy breathing. He moved like someone who'd been doing this for years, measured, silent, precise. Kyle thought he looked too old for the job. Maybe mid-60s, face mostly hidden beneath a faded gray hoodie, coveralls loose around narrow shoulders. But there was something about the way he moved like his steps had memory. No one knew his name. On the duty board, it just said J. Walker, Civilian Maintenance. Some thought he was a temp. Others didn't think about him at all. At Redstone, the gym wasn't just a place to lift weights. It was a crucible. A space where men were broken down to bare will and rebuilt into something the world never got to see. Most trainees were too focused on survival to notice the janitor. But Kyle had a habit of watching everything. A habit he picked up from his older brother, Josh, one of the senior instructors at Redstone. Josh had been through it all. SEAL Team 2, Ramadi, Fallujah. He didn't talk about it, but when he looked at someone, he saw through them. That morning, Kyle was the only recruit on time. He had 20 minutes alone before the others showed up. The janitor didn't say anything as he worked around him. Kyle tried a polite nod. The man barely glanced up, just gave a short nod back and kept mopping. Later that day, during drills, Kyle asked Josh, "Who's the older guy that cleans the place every morning?" Josh didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Don't worry about him. Just don't disrespect him." And that was it. By the end of the week, Kyle had picked up a few things. The janitor always arrived before anyone else. Always left after dark. He never joined meals, never used a phone, and never spoke unless spoken to. Yet the room seemed to shift slightly when he entered. Not in fear, not in awe. Just a pause, like people sensed something unspoken. One morning, after a brutal endurance circuit, Kyle collapsed beside the bench racks, drenched in sweat. He leaned forward to catch his breath. That's when he noticed it just under the man's left ear, barely peeking beneath the hoodie. A tattoo, faded, almost sun-bleached into the skin. Not a symbol Kyle recognized right away, but the shape stuck with him. Sharp edges, a blade, maybe. It looked like a trident, but not the kind you'd see on some flashy ink. Later that night, Kyle couldn't stop thinking about it. He stayed up scrolling through old forms, military boards, patches and insignias. It took him an hour to find one that matched. A trident through a skull, framed by wings. It wasn't listed officially, not anywhere public, but a few grainy photos from whispered threads confirmed it. It was a mark tied to Tier 1 operations, covert deployments, the kind of missions that never made it to paper, the kind you only heard about from men who never used their real names again. Kyle didn't tell anyone, not at first. It didn't feel like something to gossip about, but over the next few days, he started noticing more. The way the janitor coiled the battle ropes tight, even loops, perfect tension. The way he stacked weights by balance, not size. Most guys toss plates back on the rack without looking. He aligned them like they mattered. Like order wasn't habit, it was history. Kyle wasn't the only one noticing. One of the other recruits, Grant Dupree, a cocky brute from Houston, decided to crack a joke. He called across the gym, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, old man, you ever do more than wipe sweat off the floor?" A few chuckles followed. The janitor didn't even glance up. He just kept mopping slow, steady, in the same rhythm as before. But Josh was nearby. He crossed the floor and leaned in close to Grant. No yelling, just a quiet sentence. If you want to make it through this, you'll keep your mouth shut. Grant went pale, didn't say another word the rest of the week, and the gym got quieter after that. Still, the janitor never changed. He didn't start talking more. He didn't act like he noticed the shift, but he began to feel different. Not because he did anything, but because now people saw him. Even officers started nodding when they passed. Some instructors hesitated before asking him to move equipment. Not out of fear, more like caution. Respect without a name. One Thursday afternoon, during a standard deadlift circuit, the fire alarm blared. At first, everyone thought it was a drill, but then smoke began to leak from the vent near the locker hallway. A trainee named Eric Valdez collapsed halfway to the exit. Old knee injury. The circuit had pushed him too far. Two recruits turned to help but froze near the entrance as the smoke thickened. Not dangerous yet, but climbing. Protocol required them to wait for the medic team. But the janitor didn't wait. He grabbed a towel from the sink, wrapped it over his mouth, and walked in. No words, no hesitation. Kyle saw the whole thing. He was nearest the exit, hands still chalked from the last set. He didn't move. Nobody did. The janitor lifted Eric onto his back in one motion. Not a drag, not a struggle. A clean carry, locked grip, balance like second nature. Eric was over 200 pounds, but the man's steps didn't falter once. He walked out of the smoke, eyes red but focused, laid the kid down on a mat, checked his pulse, and stepped back. Didn't speak. Just walked to the sink, rinsed the towel, and returned to his mop. The medics arrived 3 minutes later. Too late to be useful. Kyle stood still, heart pounding not from the fire, but from what he'd just seen. Later that night, while refilling his canteen, Kyle passed by the janitor's cart. There was something stitched inside the pocket, black thread on black fabric barely visible. He squinted. 4 letters, ST6. He blinked. SEAL Team 6. The kind of team that didn't confirm members, didn't issue name tags, didn't admit they existed. Kyle didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, because now everything made sense. The way he moved, the way he didn't flinch, the way even seasoned instructors gave him space without a word. The next morning, Kyle was early again, this time not by accident. He waited for the janitor. When he arrived 4:28 a.m., Kyle stood up straight, didn't speak, didn't ask anything, just nodded. The man paused, met Kyle's eyes for the first time, and nodded back slow, steady, final. That was the moment Kyle stopped thinking of him as the janitor. He still didn't know his full name, still hadn't heard him speak more than 2 words, but something had shifted. Not in the base, in Kyle. He began training differently, not louder, but with less complaint, more purpose. He didn't tell the others, didn't need to, because once you'd seen the way that man moved through smoke, words weren't enough anyway. Summer crept in without warning, the kind that hit Redstone base like a wave, thick, dry, and merciless. Even the mornings felt heavy. Kyle had grown used to the rhythm by then. Wake at 04:30. Train. Observe. He never spoke about the janitor, but he saw more than most. One morning, during strength drills, something felt wrong. Not loud or obvious, just a shift in the air. The gym lights flickered, once, twice, then held. Josh was running a plate circuit, barking instructions over the clank of metal. Kyle was on set 4, breath steady, hands chalked. The janitor was cleaning near the entrance. Same as always. Then the alarm went off. Not a drill. This wasn't the usual shrill buzz they used for surprise discipline. This one pulsed low, deeper, connected directly to the base's emergency system. Red lights washed over the gym. Instructors froze mid-motion. The air turned sharp. Evacuate. Now. The voice over the intercom was urgent. Tight. Kyle dropped the barbell and turned. Smoke was crawling through the vents near the eastern wall. Not black, not thick, but real. Electrical fire. Maybe. Nothing explosive, but enough to trigger full protocol. The instructors moved fast. They herded the recruits toward the double doors, checking head counts as they passed. The gym emptied in under a minute. But then Kyle heard shouting. Someone hadn't made it out. Voices echoed from the back hallway near the old gear locker. Simmons. It was Josh, calling toward the smoke. A trainee named Blake Simmons hadn't cleared the hallway. Kyle took a step forward. Josh held out a hand. Back. Wait for medics. But the smoke was growing. Kyle turned and saw movement. The janitor was already halfway across the gym. No mask. No hesitation. He wrapped a towel around his mouth and pushed through the hallway door without slowing. Not a single person tried to stop him. They just watched. Seconds passed. Then 30. Then 60. Too long. Too dangerous. But then the door burst open. The janitor emerged with Simmons across his back. Perfectly balanced. His stride was even. Controlled. Fluid. Not dragging. Not stumbling. Carrying. He laid Simmons down just outside the gym doors. Checked his breathing. Then stood. His eyes were red from the smoke. But his hands didn't tremble. His breath was steady. Kyle stared. No one spoke. Even the fire crew, just arriving, stopped in their tracks. No words were needed. What they saw told a story louder than any medal. A man who didn't flinch, didn't pause, just acted. Simmons was fine. Minor smoke inhalation, nothing serious. The incident was logged as a systems malfunction, but that wasn't what stayed with them. It was the way he moved, like someone who'd done this before in worse conditions. Later that night, Kyle walked past the janitor's cart in the hallway. A small pocket on the side had come unzipped. Something dark was tucked inside. Kyle glanced, then stopped. Black thread, a patch, barely visible, black on black stitching, ST6. He didn't touch it, didn't say a word. He just kept walking. But something in him shifted, not in awe, in understanding. This wasn't a myth, wasn't some exaggerated story passed around bunks. This was real, and standing right in front of them every day. The next morning, the mood on base had changed. No announcements, no speeches, but everyone moved differently. The younger recruits stopped cracking jokes. The instructors gave wider paths when passing him in the hallway. And even the officers nodded, then looked away quickly. Josh didn't speak of it, but during warm-ups, he called Kyle over, said quietly, "Some men still serve. They just don't wear the same uniform." Kyle nodded. He didn't need more than that, and Josh walked off. That afternoon, an unannounced inspection team arrived from Coronado, brass and polished shoes. One of them, Commander Halbrook, paused at the gym entrance. He watched the janitor for maybe 10 seconds, then turned to Josh and said under his breath, "You know who that is." Josh didn't blink. "No, but I know what he is." Halbrook didn't ask more. He just nodded once and kept walking. Training resumed as usual, but something was different in the air. There was tension not from fear, but from awareness. Recruits moved with more intention. Grunts were quieter, focus sharper. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the compound cast long shadows, Kyle lingered near the side lot. The janitor was outside, rinsing out a mop bucket by the fence. Kyle stepped closer, unsure why. He hesitated, then asked, "You didn't have to go in there." The man didn't look up. He said, "Didn't matter." Then after a pause, "Some rooms. You don't leave someone behind in." Kyle swallowed. "What was it like?" The man met his eyes. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You don't carry the worst parts in your hands. You carry them in silence." Kyle nodded slowly. It made sense, more than any lecture he'd heard. Before heading back, he turned once more. "Sir, what's your name?" The man looked away, then replied, "Walker. No first name, no explanation. Just that." The next morning, something unexpected happened. The janitor's locker was slightly open. Inside, on the top shelf, was a folded American flag. Beside it, a pair of worn desert boots. A single coin rested on top of a fabric name strip. Walker. Kyle didn't touch any of it. He just stood there, quiet, until Josh stepped in beside him. Neither spoke. But later that day, Josh left a folded note on the janitor's supply cart. No signature. Just 3 words. "You still serve." That night, after lights out, Kyle found himself walking back toward the gym, not to train, just to look. Inside, the lights were off except one strip above the mirrors. Walker was mopping. Same rhythm, same path. But when he passed the mirror, he stopped. For a moment, he looked up at his own reflection, lowered the hood slightly. The tattoo was visible, faded, yes, but unmistakable, just behind the ear. Kyle watched from the shadows, then turned back toward the barracks. He didn't say anything the next day. But when he suited up for morning PT, he adjusted his posture just a little straighter. Not to impress, but because someone out there was still watching, and that mattered more than any rank. It was a Sunday when everything shifted again. The base was quieter on Sundays, no formal drills, just recovery runs and gear checks. Kyle liked those mornings. Fewer voices, more clarity. That day, he arrived early, hoping to get a few extra laps in before the heat climbed. The gym was already open, lights on, air cool, and Walker was there. As always, mopping. But something was different. He moved slower, not weak, just deliberate. Each step like it carried more weight than usual. Kyle approached him, towel over his shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. Walker gave a faint nod, then kept cleaning. Later, Josh pulled Kyle aside, said nothing at first, then handed him a folded note. It was creased, aged, and unsigned. Inside, a list, 5 names, no ranks, no dates, just 5 men and a location, Coast Province. 2008. Kyle looked up. Josh met his gaze. He left someone behind there, and that was all. The next few days passed like mist. Walker showed up, cleaned, watched. But now, something hovered around him, a presence even the new recruits could feel. Kyle noticed the silence deepen. Fewer jokes, fewer slams of locker doors. Even the instructors lowered their voices when Walker passed. On Thursday, a recruit named Ben Carson failed a rope climb and slammed his fists into the mat. Walker was across the room, organizing medicine balls. He didn't speak, didn't scold, but he walked over. He knelt beside Ben, picked up the rope, and climbed it. At 60-plus years old, with a mop cart waiting nearby, he climbed to the top, paused, then came down, breathing steady. Ben sat still, eyes wide. Walker looked at him and said, "It's not about the rope," then walked away. That night, Ben asked Kyle, "Who is he?" Kyle just said, "Someone who never stopped." And Ben nodded, as if that answered everything. Then came the rain, rare for that part of Nevada. But when it came, it hit hard. Flash floods closed the East Range. Mud slid down the access trail. Most indoor training was paused. The gym turned into the only active zone, and that's when the power cut out. Not fully, just enough. Lights dimmed. Temperature controls died. The weight room grew humid and shadowed. The recruits kept working, adapting, improvising, but Kyle could tell people were on edge. Then someone dropped a barbell. Loud. It clanged across the floor, rolled, slammed into a rack. In the echo, a voice snapped. "Watch it." Another barked back. Tension flared. Then Walker appeared. Not between them. Not with words. He just stepped into the space and picked up the bar. He re-racked it, slowly, then stood there. Still, not angry, not disappointed. Just present. And the room quieted. The storm outside kept pounding. But inside, no one moved. Kyle said later it was like someone had walked in carrying all the years no one talked about. Not just deployments or missions. The aftermath. That night, Kyle stayed late. He didn't train. He didn't clean. He just sat on the edge of the mat while Walker finished his routine. When the man passed, Kyle asked softly, "Do you ever miss it?" Walker stopped, thought for a moment, then said, "Every day." He paused, but not the noise. "I miss the clarity." Kyle understood, or at least, he was beginning to. He stood, ready to go, then turned back. "You think most of us will make it?" Walker looked at him. "You'll find out when it's not about you anymore." The next morning, Walker didn't show up. By 0500, the base admin had confirmed he hadn't clocked in. By 0600, Josh had already checked his barracks empty. No note, no message, no warning. But there was one thing. Inside his locker, someone found a folded towel. Inside that towel, a single coin. Not a standard Navy coin. This one was unique. Flat black, no rank. Just one line etched in silver. No names, no noise. Below it, a name tag, J. Walker? Nothing else. No farewell. Words spread but not loud. Not through announcements or orders. Just small exchanges in corners and quiet nods in passing. Training continued, but the rhythm had changed. Kyle felt it in his core. 2 days later, a civilian truck pulled up to the outer gate. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, weathered face, tight jaw. She carried a small envelope and asked for Josh. They spoke briefly in the admin hall. Then she left without entering the gym. No name was recorded. Josh later handed Kyle the envelope. Inside, a photograph. Walker, much younger, in full gear, kneeling beside a child in a village street. On the back, in handwriting almost too neat to be real, "Redemption isn't loud." Kyle kept that photo. Never showed it around. Never posted it on the board. But when new recruits asked about the empty cart in the janitor's corner, he would just say, "He used to be here." That's all you need to know. And they'd understand without understanding. Months passed. Redstone kept training. The gym saw new faces. Some quit. Some endured. But every morning at 0430, Kyle arrived early. He cleaned his own bench, stacked his own weights with care, and every so often he'd glance at the mirror and imagine, just for a second, that the hooded figure might be there behind him, silent, steady, watching. He never returned, not officially, but Josh said once, over coffee, "Some ghosts don't haunt, they anchor." Kyle never forgot that, and long after he graduated, whenever someone slammed a locker or scoffed at a correction, he'd simply look at them and say, "Some men don't talk about who they were, because they're still carrying it," and that would be enough. Because at Redstone, they no longer said his name, but every man who stepped onto those mats walked in a little straighter, not because of who was watching, but because of who had. And somewhere out there, whether in a quiet desert or another forgotten town, a man named Walker still carried the silence no one else could. And in that silence, he left behind something unshakable.